So now we're up to part 4, and this is the conclusion. All right, so I'm assuming if you're watching this video, you've written 2 paragraphs and an introduction, and you're up to this last stage. Okay, so the conclusion, the purpose in this case is really about reminding the reader of everything you've discussed in this essay. Now, look, it might seem insignificant when you've only written, 400 words or something like that, but it's not about how much you've written in this case, it's about the practice of reinforcing your ideas. Because in a lot of cases, the stuff you write later on, you might have written 1,000 words, 2,000 words, 10,000 words. It's important to recognize that you need to reinforce your ideas. You need to remind the reader of how everything fits together. Otherwise, it just comes across as a bit of a scattered assortment of things that don't really connect. So the conclusion is really important because it leaves a lasting impression in your reader's mind. Okay, so always value your conclusions because it's the last thing that your reader will see, and it's probably the most important thing that they'll remember. So there's 3 sections to an effective conclusion. Section 1 is about summing up the guts of what you've been trying to prove for the whole essay. So it's about bringing us back to the topic. Now, we've mentioned in previous videos that the topic is what are the intended themes of the poem. So our goal is to make it clear that everything we've discussed, so all of these things we've been talking about for the last 2 paragraphs, relate to that original topic. Okay, we want to remind the reader of this. Here's what we're looking to prove. So you can see in my example, as shown through the above discussion, Anthony Pitman's It's Like I'm Blindfolded features a number of intended messages. Okay, so notice I've slipped in that line, intended messages. Okay, because that directly connects with the topic in this case. So for section 2, there's a little trick here. This is your summary section. Okay, and what I need to do at this stage is I have to assume that after reading my second paragraph, the reader probably can't remember what my first paragraph was about, and again, like I said, if this is a 10,000 word essay, they're definitely not going to remember. So I have to remind them and reinforce them and show them how everything fits together. So there's a really simple rule that I follow for this, for a basic conclusion, which is that you need to write 1 sentence per paragraph. So if you had 4 paragraphs, you would write 4 sentences in this section. If you had 3, you'd write 3. We've got 2 paragraphs. So this section is going to be 2 sentences for me. So in this case, the first paragraph has shown how the poet uses metaphor to promote the theme of losing innocence. That's what the first one was about. Okay. The second paragraph has shown how personification was used to promote the theme of being seen as a failure. Okay, those are the 2 things that this essay has really been about. Now again, similar to the introduction, I could just say that, but you'll notice in my example, I make it a little bit less robotic, and I embellish a little bit about what those themes mean. So, e.g., we have shown how Pitman uses metaphor to convey the loss of his innocence and childhood in order to take on greater responsibility and hardship. We have also conveyed Pitman's feelings of inadequacy in the world through his use of personification. So you'll notice in this case, I mixed up the language. So it is very similar. My purpose was very similar to what I was trying to establish in the introduction. And I've really said the same thing, but I've mixed up the language so that it comes across more interesting. Okay, so vocabulary is important. Otherwise, you literally are just repeating yourself, which is fine functionally, but it can be a bit boring to read. For section 3, this is the final part. What I've sort of done is I've separated these 2 things. I've made it clear that yes, I talked about these 2 different things, and now I want to bring it back together. And what I'm really looking to communicate here is that both of these things, when I put them together, they ultimately answer the question that I was asked, which is what were the intended messages of the poem. Okay, so I've written both of these examples illustrate how Pitman has used a combination of techniques in order to communicate numerous intended messages through his text. Okay, so if you look through that, I've said intended messages. I've said used a combination of techniques. I've really kind of brought that back together to say, well, both of these things, even though they're different paragraphs, different themes, different techniques, they're actually both connected to the same purpose. Okay, and that's what I've really tried to establish. And what I'm really saying here is, look, I've answered the question. So similar to the other sections, I now put those 3 things together and I've got an effective conclusion. Okay, so if you follow these steps and you keep that kind of ideology of what you should be doing in mind, then there's no reason why you shouldn't have a great, successful conclusion.